I'm one of the Local Government New South Wales Greening Our City team members. I've probably had a bit to do with many of you, so look forward to the discussions today. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians, the Wangal people of the Eora Nation, of the lands that I'm speaking to you from today. I'd also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which each of you are all living, learning and working from today as we meet in this online forum. We recognise and thank them for caring for country, the land and waters for thousands of generations. And as we share our experiences, may we also pay respect to elders, both past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all First Nations people participating in today's session. So just to get started, today's session has been designed primarily for our Greening Our City grantees. It's an opportunity to share experiences in managing and maintaining trees which have been planted through the grant program, but also to have a broader discussion on how we ensure that trees that are planted are established and they're maintained and identified as council assets and continue to thrive. So we welcome people from other councils that aren't part of the grant program and hope that you enjoy the discussions today too. So I'd like to introduce our team. A lot of you will have already met, but we've got Chris Hudson, one of the grant managers, Sarah Mowat, our project officer, and Adrian Chai, who helps us with all things administration. And all the members of the team have put a lot of effort into making today happen. So a big thanks to all of them. And we also need to thank our funding body, the New South Wales Government, who without their support for the grants, we wouldn't all be here having this discussion. So the grants are assisting them to deliver their Premier's priority, which is to plant 1 million trees by 2022, which is the end of next year. And we're all working hard towards that. So thank you to DPI, and acknowledge some of the team from DPI will be attending in this session today as well. So the investment that's been made through the grants, just the last 2 rounds, is $20 million into the Sydney Metro region, and we're looking to establish an estimated 60,000 trees. So it's a really big commitment to building urban tree canopy. So we really do want to ensure that our plantings get the best start, get the maintenance they need, and thrive. So today we'll be hearing from 4 presenters. We've got 2 councils coming along to share their experiences, that's Sutherland and City of Sydney, and a presentation from the Which Plant Where project. And we'll also be hearing from Sarah Mowat, our project officer, who'll outline what the requirements are for grantees, just to provide assurances of their tree maintenance post-grant funding through a tree management plan or similar approach. So we'll have plenty of time for discussion and questions at the end. We encourage you to add to the chat anytime. If you've got a question as it comes up in a presentation, please feel free to put it into the chat, but we'll hold voice questions to the end and we'll have some discussion with the panel. We're scheduling to finish at 11:30, but if there's a strong discussion, we may extend for anyone who's able to stay on. So we'll get into it. Our first presenter today is Samaya Tabassum. I'll get Samaya to start sharing her screen while I introduce her. She's our postdoctoral research fellow with the Which Plant Where project at Macquarie Uni. She's presenting today on something that has been put together jointly with Gwilym Griffiths, who many of you would know, and who is unable to participate today, but we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, Samaya.
Thank you. It's just lagging a bit. I'm just going to share this. Can you all see that?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that introduction, Kirsty. My name is Samia. I'm presenting on behalf of Gwilym Griffiths on how to successfully establish your new trees. And I pay my respects today from the Darkinjung country where I'm presenting today. So successful tree planting can be divided into 4 factors, and these are planning and species selection, quality stock, correct planting, and lastly, appropriate maintenance. And all these processes should be underpinned by communication and monitoring to ensure that each of these stages is monitored for quality control and correct processes. The first step of the process of planting trees is planning and species selection. So when you're planning your urban greening project, it's really important to consider the location very carefully, as the tree will be there for many decades and will need ample space to grow and thrive. So before planting, consider things such as proximity to buildings and roads, and also proximity to above and below ground infrastructure as well. In terms of timing and when you should be planting your trees are best planted in autumn because this is when the roots and the stems will grow the most, and that'll give your tree the best chance of survival into the future. So planting in autumn will ensure that coming the following summer, your tree will have established its roots and will probably need a lot less maintenance during the hotter months. Planting. It's also a good idea to ask whether there is actually enough soil volume in your location to sustain your tree until maturity. Trees will only grow to their full size if there is enough soil volume for them to do so. So please keep that in mind. And also before planting, it's a good idea to test your soil to figure out what sort of properties it has. You know, is it well draining? Is it very clayey? That sort of stuff. And this will allow you to determine, if any, soil amendments you might need to add to the soil to improve it before you put your tree into the ground. Lastly, but one of the most important aspects of urban greening is to make sure that the species that you are planting right now are climate ready for the future. And this is because trees will live and survive for decades, much longer than we'll be around. So it's really important that what you're planting now in the ground will be able to withstand the future projected climate conditions that we predict. And the Which Plant Where plant selection tool is designed exactly for this purpose. And we're currently working on a launch early next year, so please watch this space. The next step in your urban greening project is to check for quality stock. The tree itself generally is the smallest cost of the project when compared with other things like labor and site preparation costs. However, this doesn't mean that you can skimp out on this process. So if the quality of the trees that you are buying are bad, then this could actually jeopardize your whole project. Poor quality trees might grow well, you know, in the first couple of years, but this will actually create quite significant issues later down in the track. How do you make sure that the trees that you are planting are actually good quality? So firstly, before you purchase your trees, it's actually a good idea to have an open conversation with the nurseries that you're getting your trees from to make sure that they grow their trees in accordance to the AS2303 2018 tree stock for landscape standards. This is a standard that is tried and true in the industry and is very trusted. And secondly, once you've purchased your trees, you can actually assess your stock against those standards I just mentioned using the very easy to use Tree Stock Standard project, which was created in collaboration with Western Sydney University. It's a really simple, non-destructive method to check your stock against the tree stock standards before you plant them in the ground. The next factor in your urban greening projects is correct planting and correct planting techniques. There are several key elements to understand to ensure that your trees are planted correctly in the ground. And the first one is the location and the size of the hole that you're planting the tree into. Your tree should be planted with adequate space away from buildings and roads. And the pit that you dig for the tree should be at least 3 times the diameter of the pot that it came from. And the tree should be placed squarely in the middle of that pit. And before you plant your tree, it's a really good idea to inspect the root ball closely to see if there are any roots that might be pot bound. Or might be spiraling. And if you do see any roots like that, you should remove them with a sharp, clean knife. This is a really important step because circular or pot-bound roots won't actually correct themselves when the tree has been placed into the ground. So they'll continue to spiral in the ground, and this will create really significant problems for structural integrity of the tree in the future. Root binding shouldn't be an issue if you've used good nursery practices and good nursery stock, because the trees should be pruned every time the nursery plants them into a bigger pot. So when you're planting the tree should be placed in a consolidated base at the bottom of the hole to ensure that it doesn't sink when you sort of stop supporting it. And the top of the root ball should be exactly level with the surrounding ground. Protective staking is highly encouraged to provide a buffer around the tree to prevent damage, especially if it's being planted in a highly urbanized area. This is because vandalism is actually one of the most common reasons for tree failure. However, stakes should not be directly tied to the stem of the tree, as they are not there to provide physical support for the tree. A tree should be able to self-support itself, and if it isn't, then it shouldn't be planted in the ground in the first place, because that means it doesn't conform to the nursery, to the industry guidelines that I mentioned before. And lastly, before planting your tree, the trees should be watered in their pots thoroughly before they're taken out of the plots, and immediately once they've been planted into the ground to reduce transplant stress. And applying a layer of mulch around the base of the trees is also highly recommended. And this will help to retain the soil moisture around the trees. And with time, the mulch will actually break down and improve the condition of the soil as well. Here's a very terrible photo of a tree that should not have been planted in the ground in the first place. So as you can clearly see, the roots were quite pot-bound, and this will not correct itself over time. And it also has a stake tied directly to the base of the stem. And because the stake is providing structural support to the tree thinks that it doesn't actually need to invest in stem diameter and will instead grow quite tall and quite skinny. And this will create very significant structural issues down the track in a few years. So lastly, it is essential to provide trees with an adequate establishment period to ensure that the time and resources that you've invested in this tree don't actually go to waste. And the duration of the establishment period is actually dependent on lots of factors like climate and the size of the tree that you're planting. But it's generally somewhere between 12 and 24 months, and this should be factored in your early planning stages. And the provision of supplemental water is really crucial during this establishment period to ensure that your trees have the best chance of survival. Long gone is the notion that we can sort of just plant and forget and they'll survive. They actually do need a bit of care to just let them establish and let them get going. And the amount of water that you provide is determined by the size of the root ball, and it's generally 20% of the root ball volume. So if you're planting a 45-litre tree into the ground, then you should provide approximately 9 litres of water for each application. And the frequency of watering is dependent on the time of year, with more water obviously being needed in the warmer months compared to the cooler months. And also, trees will require less water as they grow larger and become more established. And it's a good idea to assess the health of the tree frequently to understand whether it's getting too much or too little water during these applications. So that's all I have for you today. I'm happy to take questions at the end of all the presentations. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Samaya. That's a good sort of overview of the issues that council's, the considerations. We have put in the chat the link to the Western Sydney Uni document that you referred to as well, so that's available. Okay. And any particular questions for Samaya, please pop them in the chat, or we can raise them at the end.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So our next presenter today is from City of Sydney, Karen Sweeney. Many of you will know already, and she's the Urban Forest Manager, and we'll be hearing a bit about how they go about their tree maintenance and establishment at the city. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you. Hi everyone, thanks for the opportunity to talk today, and I'm actually on the Gadigal land and pay my respects as well. It's a good talk to follow on from the previous one, because that outlines what is required, and what I'm going to be talking through is how we actually go about doing that with our contractors and how we fed that into our tree management plan, which was a requirement of the grant. Next slide, please. So the key things that I'll be talking about is the tree management plan, what we included in there, how we manage our assets and our strategy, an overall contract summary, then moving into the tree supply and planting, establishment maintenance and performance management. So very similar to the previous talk, but this is more about what we actually do to deliver those results. Next slide, please. So the tree management plan, we're incredibly grateful for the grants from DPI and LG New South Wales, and we really appreciate the importance of demonstrating how we're going to manage those trees and those assets in using that grant funding. So the way that we approached our tree management plan is to have two key sections. The first part being the executive summary, and the background info that really responded to the key grant information that was requested. So it was all about making sure that that there was information there that addressed the key issues. But then we used the rest of the document, drawing on all of the Greening Sydney strategy targets, our street tree master plan, and then the contract specification extracts to actually address and outline how we go about doing it. Excuse me. So we didn't need to reinvent the wheel. All we needed to do was, a giant cut and paste really to demonstrate this is how we go about doing our tree management for the trees under this grant. Next slide, please. So to set the overall scene, we start at the very top in terms of understanding what our canopy cover targets are, and it's really key in terms of saying our target overall is to increase the green cover to 40% across the local area, including a minimum of 27% canopy cover. And that's in our adopted policy, our new Greening Sydney strategy. And that sets the benchmark really high. And what makes it critical is that we understand that we have to do a lot more planting to be able to achieve that target. Next slide, please. We take the overall target and then we move it down into more of the contracted service delivery. So we understand publicly that that's the overall target that we want to achieve. And then to go about doing that, we have 100% contracted service delivery now at the city. And it's very clear in the preliminaries of our contract that the city aims to deliver a high quality tree management program and recognise the importance of specialist knowledge, skills and equipment in being able to do that. And so that's one of the key components that we've set about all of our documents to be able to achieve that. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at the contract scope and deliverables, it's really important to understand that at the city we have whole of life contract management underneath that service provision. So all the way from planting and establishment, assessment, pruning, removal, tree bases, in the city we've got a lot of tree bases to manage, roots, pest and disease, emergency, even customer service. It's a one-stop shop that goes to our contractors to be able to do all of that tree maintenance work, and the tree management sits within the team, and the contract management sits within my team to make sure that they deliver the services that's required. And that tree planting and establishment is one of those core components because, as everyone knows, it's a big ticket cost and you want to get it right, and we have to get it right to be able to achieve those canopy cover targets. So it's an area that we focus a lot of our attention on. And the way that we set this up is to make sure that the contractors understand that they're wholly engaged, and we try and foster that sense of joint custodian between them and us in terms of achieving those overall targets and outcomes for the urban forest. Next slide, please. So tree supply and planting. What we do is we have our service provider identify the planting sites. They can draw on the street tree master plan to understand, all the different setbacks and areas that need to be considered. But they identify the planting sites. They log those sites into our asset system. It comes to us for approval so that we're across, and yes, we agree that the planting can go ahead there. It's then up to the contractor to secure the quality tree stock. They plant the tree. We have a planting season from March to September, but interestingly, obviously, we're all trying to plant the majority of trees in autumn, the best time for planting. But we appreciate we can't achieve all of that at that period of time. And we also, as we're removing trees, we want to replace them as quickly as possible. But we'll stop over the summer months because it's just too hard to get trees established, and it's not in anyone's interest to be planting at that time. The overall method or the outcome for the contractors is to establish a thriving tree. So not something that's just limping in at the end. It really needs to be thriving and the best tree for that species in that planting location. And all of the work is recorded in a system. Now, what's really important, what we worked out at the city is the key thing for us is for contractors to secure the stock, plant the tree and maintain it, because then there's less finger pointing. So if the city gets the stock and there's a problem with the stock or not, we don't know. We don't know who's responsible. There's a lot of, oh, it was from the nursery, it was the supply issue, or no, the trees weren't planted well, or no, they weren't maintained well. We have it 100% responsible by that contractor so that they are absolutely across all the different items, and if something's gone wrong where the tree hasn't thrived or survived, it's up to them to be able to manage that. Next slide, please. So just moving quickly through some of the key parts that we do for establishment and maintenance. We have at least weekly visits, and that occurs immediately after the planting site and during adverse weathers. We have frequencies set in the asset management system that can be changed. And we want the trees to be hardened off over time. So they get a lot more maintenance early on. Then as they're established, we wean them off. You can see there we've got between 12 and 24 months for the duration of maintenance as well. Every tree has to get over at least one summer. Depending on what they're doing, we might try and get them over that second summer, which is why we really try and have that planting done as much as possible in autumn so that they can start to come off maintenance coming into autumn. They go through a nice cool winter, and then as they're coming into a summer without that supplementary watering, they're actually, you know, they should be well and truly on their way. And you can see there that we have auditors that recommend that duration of the maintenance period. They're out there assessing the tree all the time. And then there's an expectation that the most of the trees, you know, greater than 70% should only have 12 months maintenance. And we have qualified arborists assessing the trees, so they're an AQF level 5, at least 5 times every year, and that's part of a quality assurance program and investigating any issues that have popped up in that time. Next slide, please. So what happens when it goes wrong? We've got clauses in the contract that relate to failure to establish. So the AQF 5 arborist from the contractor investigates the issues first, and they need to demonstrate that the death was outside of the service provider's control. Obviously, it comes to my team who are arborists, and they look into that as well. With damage and vandalism, we wanted to make sure that we share the costs with that. You know, it fosters that that there's no confusion in terms of what's happened. So we wear the initial costs jointly, and then after that, if it continues, then the city will pay the costs because obviously it's not at the contractor's responsibility. And then we formally accept the trees. So once the service provider nominates that the trees are ready to come off maintenance, we formally accept them, and then that's up to us from then on to be managing those trees. And the good use of good photos or videos, if we move to the next slide, it's really important to be able to have those because we can track a tree at any time. We can go into the system, look at that tree and say, gee, in October, it was looking great. In July, it wasn't looking that crash hot. And then the following year, it's looking even worse. So obviously, we're not going to be responsible for maintaining or managing that tree, and we wouldn't accept that tree to be coming off maintenance. So the contractor needs to be able to work out how to deal with that. Because we all have limited time, even just having a good video showing that the tree is stable or unstable in the ground is a key thing that we're moving towards as well, just so that we don't have to be running around to all the thousands of sites out there for planting. Next slide, please. We have performance management in our contracts. So we do monthly site audits. We assess every single tree after they've been planted within that month to check that it meets our requirements. And so we're not paying for maintenance and then find out 2 years down the track that it was done poorly. And then we do an assessment of every single tree during the summer just to make sure that the watering's been done well. And you can see there in the criteria assessed, we go through all the different issues in terms of, you know, planting at the correct depth, positioning, formative pruning, pest and disease, those sorts of things. Next slide, please. That planting fits into our overall contract management systems in terms of performance review. So you can see there that there's lots of different outcomes there in terms of quality of work and timing and communications, and then also the specific for planting and establishment. So it's highly regulated from my team. Next slide, please. So just to recap, because I'm mindful of timing, you can see there that that's basically how we've built together all those different documents to be able to establish that tree management plan. So having the executive summary on the different programs to respond to the grant, and then drawing on all of the documents that we've already created, so we don't have to spend too much time actually coming up with this plan. I think it took me about 3 hours to nut it together pretty quickly. Because we've got the document there and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Look, it's always great to hear what's happening, and I know other councils look a bit with envy to the city because, you know, perhaps resource-wise and things, but it's really great to see how you've approached it, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions that will come up around some of those things you've incorporated. The auditing is I think we've already got a question that's come up around that, so we'll have some discussion at the end on those issues, but very impressive to see how it all sits together. Thank you. Next presenter today is Katie Danoon from the Sutherland Shire, and she's going to share a bit of an insight into what's happening down there. Thank you, Katie.
Hello, everybody. I think the slide's coming up. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Katie, and I'm Canopy Coordinator at Sutherland Shire Council. And I really wanted to talk at this presentation from a component of the various items of our tree management plan about growing them up right, both from strategy and implementation. Next slide, please. So really our model is pretty simple, and those key elements for the tree management plan include forward planning. So knowing your budget and resources, your project scope, where your project sites are in the capital works program, the procurement, which Karen spoke really well about, then project management for the 2 years to align it to the seasonal planting times and the growing on times. So in-house data, things like your loss and gains stats, your canopy analysis of where your defects and opportunities are, and then mapping with things like the green grid, OEH, heat vulnerability, bushfire, soil types, plant communities, all that kind of stuff, as well as utilities and services, which is critical to understand. Tools are things like your spatial tools and your data tools and your reporting systems. With your engagement, really at the end of the day, residents dictate whether those trees will stay or not. So it's important to intelligently plan and review the tree selection and then that suitable placement. Marketing your message well. Don't underestimate the power of simple key messages communicated well to inform people about the reasons why you're planting in that location. And then really understanding your project and your limits. So you can't create a project via desktop design using Street View. It's just not possible. You must understand your site, your community, your constraints, and for that, you must stand in that spot where a tree needs to be planted and decide whether it can go there or not. So only second to dead or vandalised trees is the risk of overcommitting to the community things that you can't deliver. So just don't do that. Next slide, please. Our approach was really about getting the policy right. So aligning our greening goals to the planning framework and the IPNR framework. For Sutherland, trees are embedded in the principles of our development control plan, as well as our urban tree and bushland policy and our green grid strategy and mapping. These give us the strategic direction and focus of where canopy replenishment should go to where people are moving and recreating the most. And by tools in here, I mean tools for people to make informed decisions all the way from strategy through to implementation. So the more knowledge and access people have to do the job well, then the better outcomes for the planting there are. Consult, consult, consult. Not all conversations are easy and they don't always turn out as you desire, though communication is essential to taking council as well as the community on that journey to better understand the importance of our greening outcomes. And of course, quality stock, planting and maintenance can make or break a project. Next slide, please. So I know it's so cliche to write the right tree, right spot, right scale, but it is absolutely important to the success of having a robust urban street tree in a landscape. One of my greatest mentors in arboriculture is Judy Fakes, who was my teacher through my diploma of arboriculture. And she said in the very first class that we had, if you can find me the perfect street tree, I will pay you $1 million. And I thought, nice and, bright-eyed, I reckon I could do that. The reality is there is no perfect street tree. There's only really great trees for really suitable spots. And so really understanding the species that you have to go with in the soil types and the climates that you have is essential. Next slide, please. So for us, the spatial tool is absolutely critical to the success of our program. Really what we have, when we started, I guess we had PDFs printed out that we'd scribble all over and then rush back to the desktop in the office to make sure that we downloaded it while it was all fresh in our minds. And the reality is that it's very difficult to capture all of that relevant information from the get-go through handwritten notes on a page. So we've really, to have this spatial tool is a game changer for both the stakeholder engagement, the design, and for the community as well. So ours is really just an aerial photograph that we have an Access database overlaid over the top, and it has attribute drop downs that you can then just add the key information while you're on site. And within about a minute, it's uploaded to our GeoCortex system and everybody at council can see it. So there's half our stakeholders already that are able to then start a review process to look at the appropriate placement in relation to conflicts in the public domain. The other thing that's really great with this is that we can export our stock lists and have those readily available, and then make those lists easier to manage and change through the consultation and markup process. And say, for instance, something like a global pandemic happens, you can then make that contactless process through providing this information to your tree contractors to roll out the program. Next slide, please. Resident engagement is really key in this, and that spatial tool then feeds into this interactive map that we have on our website. 90% of the questions that people will ask immediately is what species is going in the ground and how big does it get? And so if you've got something that they can click on a QR code and that brings this map up in straight away, and you've got a silhouette that shows the species and then a link through to an inquiry if they've got more information, that not only it really addresses the residents' concerns straight away, and if they have any more queries, then we can capture that information and report on it, and also direct it through to the relevant people really quickly without deciphering 5 minutes worth of a voice message and not grabbing their mobile number. Next slide, please. So from a stakeholder point of view, obviously our grant program are wonderful stakeholders in this engagement process, and the information fed through to that on a regular basis. Residents are right up there with the key, but also understanding your internal stakeholder parties as well as your public domain utilities and services. Next slide, please. Communications is a great element to have, and I think it's a really important component of the tree management plan. From understanding the demographics of those people in the areas that you're planting out with will feed into your key messages, and then you can start to tailor the tone of your message, and also any social media that you're doing, any type of collateral from a branding point of view, and also then frequently asked questions on your website. Next slide, please. So here's an example of the engagement calendar that we had for our 3K Trees 2020 project last year. And really the first top bars across the top are really key to the success of the program, because we had our committee, our executive committee and our senior managers, and also then elected representatives updated through reports or bulletins on a really frequent basis. And it wasn't War and Peace, one sentence with a really great photo or an information piece about the communication that we were putting out made such a difference to the amount of education that the people at that level had, so that when they communicated to the community or internally, they had those consistent key messages and they knew what was going on. Another great thing to be able to highlight here is for Sutherland Shire Council, most of our staff actually live in the Sutherland Shire. So to communicate, having information sessions and information readily available to staff meant that information can be really passively disseminated through the community, both at a work level and social. Thank you. Next slide, please. So here's some collateral that we have for our projects. The blue poster in the top corner is what we attach to telegraph poles. So because we do letter notifications and information on the website, but if for pedestrians and commuters going through those areas, those signposts are great to be able to capture, to let them know what's going on, and also have a call to action on there. a website form that can capture if people want private property stock for their location, and also if they want to nominate other streets or their frontage for tree planting in the future, we can capture that information. Everything passively goes to the website, and so to have a URL that's simply your website and trees, and then have a landing page that will direct that through, is a really simple way to cut down the dialogue of the messages and make it really easy for people to find out information. And then again, a great tool that we had with that project was to add those silhouettes to our frequently asked questions so that they could see the species types that were going in. Next slide, please. So here's another example of how social worked really well. We hadn't used social before for our projects, but we did that for last year. We did 35 posts through the 3K Trees program, and it's just amazing, a different avenue to communicate to residents that create a great dialogue. A word of warning though, we started off calling it Fun Fact Friday because we thought that would be great, but what it meant was that the dialogue largely happened over the weekend, and then by the time we had a chance to go through comms to respond, it was old news and we'd missed that opportunity to engage with people. So we then turned it into Tree Tuesday, posted early on Tuesday mornings, and we were able to monitor the posts and then respond back really readily. It's just such a great way to engage the community at a passive level. So an example of this from a social analytics point of view is that performance of the post. The video that we did on the nursery got 5,000 hits in 24 hours, which was pretty cool for a Sutherland Shire tree post. The key to success when we look at the analytics: less words equals more interest. So the wordier it got, the more they switched off. Next slide, please. Procurement, I won't go into a lot of detail with this because Karen has done a beautiful job of that. But I will say that from our project point of view, we do 2 years maintenance for our Green Streets program. And what we do is then focus on the watering. The timeframes that we plant, again, are those March to September window. And the watering is, we do the first month, we do weekly, the second month we do fortnightly, and then we do monthly from then on. So we have a contract manager that will go through and review from a procurement point of view all of our projects, and then they manage the reports and assessments that come through for these trees and the invoicing as well. We make sure that mulching occurs, and obviously damage is reported, and we address that as quickly as we can, and then it's all signed off. For the trees that really do need that continued management after that 2-year period, some of those slower growing species, or some that have been replaced through the project that are then younger than the 2 years at the end of that time frame, we hand them on with a schedule through our collector app, our little mobile device, that they can see what trees are then transferred onto them, and then they will continue that maintenance until those trees are ready. Next slide, please. So here's an example of Jordan marking out the nature strip with a blue cross, and this is really important. So we essentially, with the progress of the project, we do the initial design, then it's reviewed, and then this last stage of walking out is to just triple check exactly the specifications. So essentially it's a 3-check process. We mark out the nature strip to give the residents a visual of where that tree is proposed to accompany the online map, and then we pop the second letter in the letterbox just to give them that letter with the QR code to say that the lucky you're getting a tree. Isn't that wonderful? So for larger projects like we did with last year's, we color coded those so that when the inquiries for residents came through, then we'd know who the relevant people were to direct those through to our customer request system. Next slide, please. So this is, I guess, the variations. Majority are of our standard spec is the hardwood frame with the 3-state configuration. We do metal cages. Early on in the Green Streets program, we did a lot more metal cages. They're really, they create a lot more maintenance, and they certainly have the capacity to prop and damage trees. But what it did do in the really early stages of our program was it just stopped residents being able to reach in the top and pull out the tree, so that we had a chance to get that tree established just while, in the early days of that program commencing. We do where we've got luxurious nature strip spaces, we do mulch garden bed options, and then obviously in reserves and pocket parks. And our stock can vary depending on the prominence and obviously the requirements of the project. So generally all of our projects do have 2 years maintenance. The one difference is that with our tree planting crew, we do have through that form online and also through customer requests, residents do request individual street tree planting. So we go out and assess the appetite for continuing to water that street tree ongoing. And if we do believe that the residents are willing to do that, with which many of them are, we get about 600 to 700 requests like this per year, then we'll plant it, and that watering will then become an ongoing action for the residents to do. Next slide, please. So vandalism, it does happen, and it's really frustrating when it does, when everybody's put all of this work into growing and planning the project. But it is a lot less if you do the consultation up front, because you'll find that the most vocal people are very quick to get on that phone as soon as they receive the letter. And then you can gauge the level of vexation that they have and see the success of what a 45-litre tree will do at the front of their property kind of early on. So they have to get through me and a really good, nice dialogue of a valid reason as to why they won't. But generally, what it does is minimise the amount of vandalism that does happen. Crash tackling from the pub on a Friday night is jovial for some people, and then also topping. And people love boxy or topiary type trees, so we do have to manage a little bit of shaping as well. Next slide, please. If I can leave with one key element of the success of a planting program, it's connecting with people. If you connect with your community and you connect with council and you connect with your stakeholders, and people are aware of the direction of what those greening goals are, you are more than a majority of the way there for the success of the program. Certainly the planting, the stock, the establishment, the procurement is all very important. But if you can have the community on board to take those trees along, then your success is going to be a lot higher. Next slide, please. Just to give you a little idea of what Green Streets looks like over the 8-year period, we're up to 190 street tree projects. We're nearly kissing 14,000 trees, and that's street trees. So in addition to that, we've gifted, as if ever anybody says, I'd like a tree for my private property, I would invest just to give that tree, because whether it's on public or private, it's still a benefit. And so any way that you can give out vouchers or trees, and satisfy planting requests in the public domain, it's all to the success of the canopy replenishment. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. I think you've brought a really great element to the discussion, and that is the engagement part of this, and how we, that makes the job of maintenance easier if the community's on board. So mindful of time, so we'll jump straight into the next presenter, which is Sarah from our team, Sarah Mowat, and she's just going to run through sort of what we're requiring from grant projects. So in the context of all of the discussion we've had this morning, what the grant requirement is in finalising your reporting and things, and then we'll move into questions. Thanks, Sarah.
Perfect. Thanks, Kirsty. So yeah, I'm Sarah, as Kirsty said. For those of you who don't know me, I'll just quickly go over a little bit of the requirements of what we're looking for in the tree management plans for the Greening Our City grantees. I'm sure all of you know by now that the tree management plan is a requirement of both rounds of grants of 2020 and 2021. And in terms of, it's just we want you to show that the trees will be maintained and they will be managed. They're not just planted and then left. We want to see trees like in the photo on the left that are nice and healthy and they're providing shade, not like ones on the right, which sadly have died. Next slide. So just in terms of key dates, for the 2020 round of grants, your draft tree management plan has already passed, it's already been due, and your final one will be due in January, which is the next reporting round. And then 2021 grants, your draft tree management plan will be due in April, with the final one due in December. Just noting that if your projects are quit early, there will be slight changes to those dates, but we'll take it on a case-by-case basis. Next slide. In terms of the minimum timeframe covered by the tree management plan, it is 12 months from the grant program completion. So for 2020 grant round, that's from July 2022 until June 2023. And then for the 2021 grant round, that's December 2022 until November 2023. Again, if your project extends, there will be slight changes to those dates. It will be 12 months from project completion. And if you're doing a combined tree management plan, there are a number of councils who have sort of upwards of 5, 6, 7 projects spanning both grant rounds. You can do a combined tree management plan. So there's just one plan that covers all of your projects. If you're doing that, then that time frame will need to cover basically from July 2022 until November 2023. It needs to cover the whole period. Next slide. So in terms of the type of tree management plan or how you structure it, we don't have any particular requirements. It's really what works best for you and for council. You can do a standalone plan, so a plan that is just purely for the management of greening our city trees only, or you can do an integrated one, so similar to what Karen was showing earlier. Pick and choose bits and pieces of existing plans, of existing processes and documents, combine them all into a plan that covers greening our city trees. It could cover all trees within your whole LGA, of which some of them will be greening our city trees. So whatever's easiest for you, the key sort of consideration is that it has to work and it has to be operational. And yeah, we don't just want to plan for a plan's sake. It should be something that you can actually carry out, and so that the trees are maintained and have the best start to their lives. Next slide. So in terms of what we're looking for in the tree management plan, we have sort of a few things that we do want to see within the plans, and they are maintenance schedules. So who's responsible for the maintenance, how often the trees are going to be visited, what will the visits involve, risk mitigation. So looking at what the potential risks are to the survival of the trees and how you're going to manage them and how you're going to reduce them if possible. Water management, that's been mentioned a few times today, that's key. Frequency of watering, the sources of the water that's going to be used. Replacement plantings, again, a commitment that council will replace any trees that either die or are damaged or vandalised. Adding in any local community aspects. Obviously, every council area has different communities, different sort of issues. So anything, just as Katie was mentioning, all the community engagement. So that might be something that they're really focused, that Sutherland's really focused on. So that could be listed in the tree management plan as well. And then lastly, the connection to broader plans and budgets. As I said before, the tree management plan has to be operational. And so we want to see how it links to other plans, other processes that go on within council. Next slide. And then just a couple of resources if you fancy a bit of reading. So the standard at the top has already been mentioned today. There's this book by Ross Clark, Specifying Trees. And then also just have a look at any existing tree documentation that you already have within council, or there's a wealth of knowledge in other councils. If you need any information, feel free to get in touch with us. We can sort of put you in touch with other councils if there's something in particular that you want to discuss with someone. Next slide. Oh, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to all of our great speakers today. A huge lot of interesting information and a lot to cover. We've got some time for questions. If we do have more questions coming through, we may extend on a bit. When we've been talking as a team about the tree management plan, we thought, well, I think the name is probably not great for it, because it's not necessarily a new. We don't want councils to do a whole lot of new work and produce a new document necessarily, unless that's helpful for them. And most councils have some great, as we've seen today, some really great resources and documentation already in place. So the main purpose is to give the assurance to DPI that trees are going to be looked after in the longer term, and in for a minimum, you know, one year after the end of your grant. So there's been some great questions in the chat, and thanks Karen for answering a lot of those. Before people jump in, if they've got some burning questions, they can speak up in a sec. We'll just go back and have a look at some of those questions and maybe to some of the questioners to make sure that things they feel like they've had some good answers, or if there's any more discussion. Or also, you know, it's a bit hard sometimes to answer a question in the chat. Karen, if you wanted to expand on any of the answers, that would be great too.
Well, I guess I'm just, if anyone needed more information than what I gave, because I'm trying to get through how we manage, you know, our 40-odd thousand assets and these other trees in that period of time's always a challenge, especially for someone like me who can talk a lot. So if people have got specific questions now, please use the time. Happy to help. Ooh, good.
Well, it sounds like there's some good. Everyone's thinking about a lot of that. A lot of that stuff. Oh, thank you. Could just I should remind people to say their first name and their council as well. Please.
I'm Paul Hackney from City of Parramatta Council. I'm not a tree person. I'm a stormwater management treatment person. I've always felt that it would be good to passively water street trees by diverting stormwater. It sounds like a good theory to me, but is it a practical thing? Are people actually doing? That's a sort of broad question to anyone, really.
We are at the city where we can. We have, you know, the WUSD that's installed. If it's an absolutely designed streetscape where we can, we will. And if not, we've also just been punching some hole into curbs to try and get as much as whatever we can in. So yes, we do.
So just how does that work, Karen? You put a hole in the curb and just for stormwater to flow straight to trees, is it?
Yeah, we do. It's a very low cost system.
Wow.
In terms of just drilling a hole in a concrete curb. We won't do it in sandstone. We won't do it in areas where it's clay soils. It'll only be in sandy soil areas, and we've literally just drill a hole into the curb and connect a pipe to it and hope that captures some water as best as we can without having to re-engineer the entire curb and gutter system.
Good. I approve, but I just wondered if there's any, not wanting to cause a problem, but has anyone had problems with this? Is there any reason why we should avoid doing the sort of thing that Karen's talking about?
For Sutherland, we're quite new in the world of the water efficiency solutions. There's lots of dialogue that is being had about it, and great conversations being had with our stormwater team as well as asset services. So we're looking at, you know, the upgrade works, trying to roll them out through the curb and gutter replacement program, and we really like the idea of the tree net pits that just have those little outlets that go through. But there's a couple of little ideas that we'd like to see from variations that might work better. That are, I guess, the reality of and the resistance to it in the past is that they do block up and clog up, and residents do find stormwater capture in some form or another quite a messy process that has that maintenance requirement afterwards. So we're definitely a little bit behind in the way of those water efficiency solutions. What we do at Sutherland, though, is that we have a recycle water plant that we do with our treatment works. So we utilise that on the eastern side of our program because it is on that eastern side of. So it's not cost effective to transport that water all the way to the west to water trees out there, but we do that from recycled water.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. And we also have there's quite a few grants, well, 12 grants under an innovation stream, Paul. That and some of those are looking at innovative methods to capture stormwater. So if you shoot us an email, we'll keep you in touch with some of those as because they will have findings as those projects progress.
Thanks.
Now I can see Ariz from Liverpool has his hand up. Ariz.
Thanks, Chris. Just one morning, everyone. Good presentations. And I just wanted to check with you all in terms of how you've dealt with underground services. I mean, a lot of these nature strips have underground services, and this is a very common issue that we've been having in Liverpool, where we're trying to plant in the peripheral areas of city centre. And there's so many services and there's so much competition that just wanted to get your learnings and if you've, the ways that you've dealt with it. So.
I think Katie and I are having a bit of a standoff at who's go first. Do you want to go first?
Oh, I'm happy either way, Karen. I've got a few things to say on this, but I'm happy to let you go first.
You go.
Okay. So from underground services point of view, it is a great question because it's the most conflicting discussion points, and that's why stakeholder engagement is really important in those circumstances. We have confidentiality agreements with a lot of the major service providers so that we can see the below ground services from a primary point of view. What we can't see is the private property access ways, which is where you need to ensure that your tree contractors do the dial before you digs to make sure that that they are aware and addressing all of those conflicts in the public domain. It's also really important that we note to residents that where we put that blue cross is dependent on where that final review process occurs, so that if they say, I absolutely want this to line up perfectly, but then there's an eye of something in the way, we either have to remove that tree or shift it completely. One of the things that I think is really important is the engagement all the way through. And no contractor ever said, this has to be 600 down, but just to give roots a great deep soil space, I'm going to go lower. So generally, yeah, you do find that they are in the upper reaches and in those spaces. It is all about being able to manage that urban conflict and try to minimize it. We're not going to eliminate it, but what we're trying to do is just position those trees that are best kept away from services where possible.
And I'll just add a bit to that because our experience with George Street in the city, and you can imagine what it's like in the city. We just stand there sometimes and scratch our heads and think, how are we going to do this? But so we kind of have a bit of a hierarchy depending on the asset type. So in terms of what it's made from, so, like, is it a telecommunications, is it water, is it high pressure gas? And the junction points are actually what's really important there in terms of where there might be an issue, like Katie mentioned. And we also have really good agreements with the different stakeholders so that we can sort of turn around and say, Sydney Water, if there's a problem and if there's a burst water pipe and we can't fix it, then yes, we'll remove the tree. But to just say, no, we can't have anything near a water pipe or near the sewer pipe just isn't reasonable in 2021. Almost 2022. So they've come a long way with those sorts of conversations, and they understand we've got 24/7 service provision if it's emergency works. They've also got the ability to be able to remove the trees where possible, but we are really careful about where we push that issue, particularly if it's a key service line that might be running to a hospital or the court system, or there's some key infrastructure that you've got to be mindful of what that may impact on. Yeah, but otherwise we go ahead and plant. We will even cut root balls out to fit over pipes and assets and other things, shave off a side, do whatever we need to do to be able to get some trees in, because as far as we're concerned, we're prepared to help that tree overcome that loss of its root ball at the stage of planting to be able to get it in there.
Yep. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, some great answers there, and I really like the I think it was tree-centered approach I heard yesterday to a plan, and as we increasingly recognise the value and the importance of trees to our world, it's great to see that that's being reflected in how we put them in the ground. Now I can see Mitch, we have come to the end of our official time. I can see there's a hand up at least, and maybe there's a few out there with some questions. So we will extend on a little bit. Mitch from Campbelltown. You still with us, Mitch?
Sorry, I'm muted. I think I'd get used to this after a while. Yeah, I'm Mitch. I'm the coordinator of natural areas at Campbelltown. We're certainly in the infancy of taking all this stuff on, but just with a couple of comments about stormwater reuse and those different options. Just a bit of selfless promotion for us and DPI. We just completed the Rosemeadow 5 million trees project, which was prior to the Greening Our City grants program, and that has a street design manual that goes with it. And there was a big stormwater investigation for Hayden Park, which was a concept design that sort of looked at some quite interesting reuse of stormwater. And there was also a webinar where Daniel from DPI presented on that information. So there's a little bit of stuff out there, and I know that the unis are certainly pumping out information, but yeah, stormwater is a resource that we need to use a lot more.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. And if you want to if you've got any links or info, but please paste them into the chat.
Certainly will.
Okay, Sarah Marie.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Welcome.
I'm Sarah Marie. Thank you. I'm from Waverley Council. I work with the tree management team there, just doing my Cert 3 to become an arborist and then following on for my diploma. And I had a fair bit to do with the Greening Our City grant, and particularly the community consultation side of things. I just wanted to put it out there. I've really enjoyed Sutherland's info on what you guys did there with your video. I thought that was a really great idea, and 5,000 views for a council video, that's impressive. So basically my question was, in terms of species varieties, did anyone out there provide residents any options with species, or was it all just opt in or opt out?
One of the key things that we do is ensure that we've got a substitutes list of about 5%, and I should have said that with our stock ordering. It's really critical when you have those conversations with people that you have options to swap out. Oh, I don't want one with red flowers, but I'll accept one with yellow flowers. Or I don't like this species, but I can do that species. So what we do is we generally bucket them into small, medium and large categories. And then we have a suite of varieties of species. Not too many people are swapping out for eucalypts, can you believe it? But they're definitely swapping out for the medium to smaller trees. And some people just have specific desires for certain trees. So we ensure that substitute list has like a palette of the most popular trees that we can swap out.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So did you let them know of those options when you initially put the letters out there with the QR code?
No. So what we do is we certainly have those conversations if people inquire about those species. But I have a little repertoire of email templates that I have with those silhouettes. Essentially, those silhouettes come in so handy, and they're based on the range of sizes for those species in the Sutherland Shire. So we can really predict the size of our own species and be able to reference that. And a lot of people go, oh, I Googled this and it's 40 metres, but really the reality of that tree growing in Sutherland Shire. So we've got a great comeback for that. But no, we don't promote it as something that we do, but it's definitely a negotiating point that really helps. And sometimes it's as simple as saying, well, let's just swap those species out. I'll give you a choice of 4 and you email me back and tell me which species you'd like. Not, I'll email you and let me tell you if you do like a tree, it's which one would you like. So generally it's always on the forefront of the tree is going to go in there, and then we work backwards from there.
Okay, that's so handy. Thanks so much for your feedback, Katie. I really appreciate it.
Oh, so welcome. And the other element to add that we do have the luxury of is our own nursery to be able to draw on those the variations for. And then if we have that stock that it doesn't roll out with the projects, we can then on-sell it to the community or gift it away. So I always think from a Green Streets point of view, giving trees is the same as investing in planting them into the streets. So that surplus stock, if it doesn't get used, we find ways to gift it on to willing people that want them in their private properties.
Of course, yeah, that having your own nursery thing would be a huge help. We definitely struggled with the pre-grow, trying to coordinate that with all nurseries, and yeah, it was a bit of a nightmare. Sorry, just quickly, did you have an opt-out option?
Well, yes, if it's a whole dialogue at the end of it and you really feel like their position is just not going to change and you don't feel like that, that is going to result in anything else apart from vandalism, but they really do have to give, you know, they have to get through the gauntlet of a great conversation with me to have that happen. So generally it's the guys in the, you know, in the field, or the Green Streets officers that we have, and they escalate to me, or sometimes they just come directly through to me. But yeah, they have to get through me for me to say no though.
I like that a lot. Excellent. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Katie. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Katie. And really interesting because and people are quite protective about their, you know, their local space. And in some, I can imagine in some cases, people just want to feel like they've got some control. And so giving them the option of, you know, of other trees is a great way to do that. And Katie, just out of interest, no, you go.
I was just going to say to that point, the reality of, you know, the Sutherland Shire has 81,000 frontages. And so all of those people are the custodians of that frontage of land, and they do take ownership. Most of them know it. Most of them take care of it, and some of them take care of it really well. So for us to come in and put an imposed risk to say, thanks for all of that, but we're just going to put a tree in here and it's for the benefit of everybody, so, you know, like it or lump it, we don't really want to have that approach. But we just have to also find that as a happy medium of saying it's actually really important for the community. You are a custodian and stewardship of this access way in the frontage of your land, which is for everybody. And it's really about taking them on the journey and not forcing that on them, because I think there's two different approaches that have two different outcomes from that point of view.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. And just quickly, do you or when do you think to go in person to talk to people, or do you normally just always on the phone? Or
look, body language is so important. When I did the consultation for 3K Trees 2020, it was really heavy because we couldn't meet on site because of the, you know, the restrictions, and it makes such a difference to the outcome of that dialogue sometimes, because generally the highest complaints are sightlines, access, maintenance. And so the easiest way to stand there is generally stand in the spot where the tree is and get the residents to drive or park in their driveway, and then we can start to have those conversations. That can't be done over the phone. And so really, like, if I can say I'm the trunk of the tree, this is a general, you know, diameter of what this tree will be, and then we can start to look at the sightlines and it'll alleviate their concerns a little bit. So a lot of stuff is better on site, but certainly, yeah, dialogue from it's not really possible to get to everybody's location, is the unfortunate thing, unless you had a great team and a large resource.
Thanks, Katie. That makes sense. Now I can see David's got his hand up, but also I think I might have seen a hand pop up from Natalia from Randwick. Natalia, did you have a question?
Hello, Chris, and
hi.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Thank you, everyone, for a great presentation. As always, I watched Karen yesterday as well, and it was great presentation as well. And Katie, with all your advices, I have obviously Katie just brought up this conversation about vandalism, and we have a specific area where tree officers has planted many times, and it's always tree disappeared, broken, and whatever happens there. So the consultation process for that area would be the best approach from your advice. And maybe, you know, what is the best process? Do you advise it's coming, or because I don't know what's happening before, I'm just new to that area, but I'm trying to kind of knowing that there is required, but nothing happening.
It is a really tricky thing, because from when you look at the layers of your municipality, generally the ones that are the lower socioeconomic areas are the ones that have the lesser trees, and the ones that are the more affluent areas have the higher volume of trees. And it's funny that the resistance seems to happen, you know, at those polar opposites of where people need it the most. It's sometimes really challenging to get them in. The way that we rolled out with the Green Streets program was little projects in high thoroughfare areas, so that they could start to see the planting program that we were doing. They could see the quality stock, they could see that they were being maintained, and we were then able to chip away and kind of demonstrate at a higher you know, audience frequency, and then started to move into different areas. There's definitely areas that we have in the Sutherland Shire that are just, they're just so tree resistant, and we just have to sometimes make those decisions to move on. The other thing that I could suggest that you do is maybe go out to the community of that area and figure out who do want trees, and then start to plant those ones and try to avoid the people who are so resistant to it. And then when they can start to see that, you know, those quality trees are being planted, then you start to get that, oh, I might have what they're having because it's not so bad. The other thing is that sometimes we do beat on about biodiversity and environment a little bit too much, and it cuts people off who are not, you know, open and willing to have those dialogues, or it's not of interest to them. So if you can start, when you talk about those communication plans and about those communities and what their opportunities and challenges are for those key messages, sometimes it's the, you know, the efficiency of having, you know, reduced bills with your heat mitigation, and opportunities for, you know, melanoma reductions and shading kids, you know, from a heat point of view, and just try to take those greening messages out of it as much, and kind of put it in what's in it for them, how will it benefit them, and yeah, your audience will kind of dictate the way that you roll that out.
Yes, thank you. You nailed it right at the beginning. On the end, it's a low social economical and not understanding and wanting. And it's, you know, when you hear, or actually some areas where we have a sea views, apparently, you know, talking to tree office, they you know, they're telling you stories. I can't believe people do this, but yes, thank you again. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Katie and Natalia. And David from Penrith.
G'day everyone, I'm a landscape architect at Penrith City Council. This one's for you, Katie. We talked a bit about, I guess, the need to kind of do a bit of site analysis and, you know, work out sight lines and get to the site and make sure the site's appropriate for the tree. For some of these projects, we're planting kind of hundreds and kind of thousands of trees in some cases. How do you resource that site investigation for, I guess, these hundreds of trees? Can you talk about just a little about how your resource and how you go about doing that investigation?
Well, from a resourcing point of view, I am the only full-time Green Streets person at Sutherland Shire Council. We draw key part-time people in at different areas along the stages of the project. The reality from looking at those asset services requirements is that we have a public domain design manual, and the people who carry out the Green Streets designs for our projects make sure that the sightline distances and the road rules and the distances from roll curb and the requirements for working in the public domain are in the foresight of their mind when they're rolling out the projects. So they know if they're working in a bushfire zone, then those trees need to be situated at least 10 metres apart, and we need to have a pallet of species that are smooth barked, etc. So they've kind of armed with that information up front. The other great thing about having those spatial tools is that when you roll them out, so when we go through stakeholder engagement, we have the traffic engineers and the stormwater and the footpath program and the design upgrade works and the major works cycleways manager. They all then have a look at those plans from their individual perspective, and then straight away we can have that feedback and collate that information, and it makes it so much easier to then design those projects with minimal future conflicts.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, conscious that we've gone well over our allotted time. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us. Is there a final question out there? Someone like to jump in? Any final questions or thoughts or observations? Any hands up that I can't see?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm Brenda from Blue Mountains Council.
G'day, Brenda.
Thank you. Now, and I've sent Karen a message and she wrote back, but I'd love to know what Katie has to say as well. So at Blue Mountains Council, we've had quite excessive pruning with our street trees by Endeavour Energy. And I'd love to know what other councils do. So even if other ones from Penrith or Campbelltown want to step in, how do you manage, especially when we want to plant new trees? Obviously we listen to what Samaya has suggested with the you have a look at where you plan where your tree's going and the species, but do you do pruning of trees within a certain, like within 3 meters or a meter of the street, what do you call it, power lines. Sorry if I'm not making any sense, but I'd love to know.
That does make sense. Yeah, look at, and I'm sure with Karen's response as well, it is such an enormous, complex body of work when you're talking about power reliability and foliage. And there's so much different. I mean, certainly, from Blue Mountains, there's so much bushfire interaction that would play a part of that, and the infrastructure upgrades of how their poles and wires are. Certainly from a species point of view, we've got the legacy of thousands of street trees that were planted under wires, that were promoted in the 40s and 50s as beautiful impact trees, that they've just well and truly been gully cut and now represent quite a challenge from our maintenance point of view ongoing. And there's not very easy ways to be able to medial prune those trees back, but they do, we're largely trying to look at addressing those most defective process from an Ausgrid impact point of view. I think a large portion of it is obviously education and improving the pruning outcomes of that, but species selection is the key. So largely from a Sutherland Shire point of view, we worked with Ausgrid to, for a number of years, we didn't plant under the wires. We planted with our Green Streets programs on the opposite side, and what that gave us was opportunity to be able to work with Ausgrid. We had 11 removal and replacement projects in the Sutherland Shire over about 7 years, where we identified streets that had the worst line cleared trees. They removed them to ground, we stump ground, and then we removed them with smaller species. The reality is that the landscape is changing from those lovely large avenues of large around power lines, and certainly in our bushfire zones to smaller trees. The key is, I guess, decurrent branching, so that they branch a lot lower, so that the interaction with the wires in the future will be foliage and not large limbs that we're seeing to come off at a great rate. But I guess the transparency through that communication with Ausgrid, and then working together with them, an endeavour, and I guess in that to improve those vegetation outcomes over time is going to be a longer body of work, but definitely species selection is the key to making sure that you're not creating the same inherent legacy issues into the future.
Yeah, and I suppose with that comes knowing what's going to be happening in the future. They may decide to put these wires underground, and we've already planted, say, we go through this tree management plan and we put in a whole bunch of trees, and then 20 years down the track, they're like, okay, now we're going to be putting the wires underground, and we've just had all these beautiful trees. But you're right. Looking at it, go on the other side of the road if there hasn't been trees there already. Yeah.
I mean, obviously a big part of that is where your footpaths are, because it's great to have trees on the other side and you get bigger species, but you're really not shading where pedestrians are moving the most as well. So you've got to find those balances.
Well, we don't have many footpaths, and that's another issue, because there's a lot of, now we're starting to see a lot more projects within our council. People are starting to put, other teams wanting to put the footpaths. So we've got a process in place that anyone that's doing any infrastructure within Blue Mountains Council, they need to let the tree team know if, it's going to impact tree root zones, whether it's a footpath or the roads, a whole variety of things, or parks, if they're upgrading a park and they're putting kids' play equipment right up under a tree, or that, that asphalt, not soft fall, all of that. But yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, we've got Chad from Wallandilly who's had his hand up. We will make that the last question for the session today. Chad.
Mine wasn't a question. I was actually going to answer Brenda.
Great.
Well, Wallandilly, I was previously at Liverpool. Your whole question about with Endeavour and Ausgrid. Ausgrid have already got, you can't stop them from pruning it. They have their legislation, they have their processes and protocols where they can prune to. And councils did try to take them to court over this and lost. What we found was the best way to do it was to get a relationship with the energy provider. So for us, it's Endeavour. And when I was at Liverpool, it was the same thing. And we ended up coming to a bit of an agreement The old trees, there's nothing you can do about it. They're there. They need to be cut to, I think it's now 5 meters below to the nearest growing point of the tree from the wire. And there's nothing you can do about that. So we worked in with Endeavour to the point where if it was going to cut down too low and the tree became dangerous, we came to a deal that they would remove it to ground level. We'll pay for the stump grinding, come back later, and we would replant with a better species of tree. And it's just something you're going to have to deal with the older trees. There's no way of getting around it. And then when you said about the whole of they decide to put power lines underneath, well, that's when, if you've already got that good relationship, we have said to them that, well, we want non-invasive trenching to happen, and we've managed to get the power lines underneath the trees so the trees can stay. So that was our best opportunity, was just reach out to the Endeavour or whoever you have. The large trees, there's nothing you can do about it. They're going to prune them whether you like it or not, and they're going to prune to their standards, which is just 5 meters to the nearest growing point. So they will butcher the tree. There's nothing you can do. So it's just about right species moving forward. We can't fix the past. The past is the past. But my advice would just be to try and get in good with Endeavour or whoever your energy provider is up there, and just try and make it as painless as possible.
Well, thanks, Chad. Some great advice there, and you know, building those relationships again to provide some help. So that brings us to the close for today. But before we go, we'll say a huge thank you to Samaya from Macquarie University, Karen's from the City of Sydney, and Katie from Sutherland Shire. Very interesting. Great to have the additional questions and discussion going on. We have, with the Greening Our City team, recently launched our Growing Greener newsletter. So if you haven't had the first issue of that and you'd like to get that, please shoot us an email. Coming up from DPI, we understand, is the Growing Greener Neighbourhoods program. So that's a grant program. It's not a contestable or competitive one. It's one where there's been an allocation, we understand, to each of the metropolitan councils. So keep an eye out for that, as we understand, in the next week or so. I think it's got a closing date well into February from memory. So it's not one of those terrible pre-Christmas rush jobs. We have recorded today. Everyone who attended will get a link to our recording, and fantastic work that's being done by councils across the city. We're thankful. We really appreciate all of the tree planting that's happening, and it's fantastic to see those trees going in the ground. Thank you to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
Thank you. See you later.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.